Are there contradictions in the Bible? Let's look at this example. Matthew chapter 27 tells us how Judas, the disciple that betrayed Jesus, died. And Matthew says that Judas went away and hanged himself. However, over in the book of Acts written by Luke, we read a different account of how Judas died. Luke says Judas bought a field, there he fell headlong, his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. Well, that is a gruesome picture for sure. Is it a contradiction? Now, you may wonder, is this important? Perhaps the Bible gets a lot of historical details right, but occasionally it makes some mistakes, and we should allow for that. I think this is a very important issue because it comes down to, can I really trust the Bible? Can I trust not that it's a good book, but that it is the Word of God, that it is the authoritative guide for truth, for right and wrong, for how to live life, for purpose in life. And the Bible itself holds itself up as the Word of God. And so I either have to dismiss that and not take the Bible seriously the way the Bible itself says it should be taken, or I need to resolve this question, are there contradictions? And so many people have pointed out on the internet through memes like this. For instance, this one says at the bottom, do you really still believe this book of contradictions, myths, and Bronze Age stories should guide and direct your life? And so that's a challenging question. Many people will say there are lots of contradictions in the Bible. And I think the first thing to point out to people is to just simply ask the question, can you give me an example? And most people will really struggle to find just one example of a contradiction to support their claim. But often you will, or from time to time, you'll run into someone who will use examples like the one that we're looking at about Judas. And we need to kind of know, how should we address these kinds of questions? So I'm going to come back and talk about Judas in a minute, but let me first say that I don't believe there is a single contradiction in the Bible. If there was a contradiction, and I need to define contradiction, a contradiction would be that if two different accounts, two different places in the Bible could not possibly both be true. If A is true, B is not true. If A is not true, B is true. But they can't both be true, or maybe both of them are wrong. But a contradiction means that two accounts can't both be true, like Judas. Could it be true that Judas hanged himself and that's how he died, or that he fell and that's how he died? If those things can't fit together, it would be a contradiction. And that would mean that at least one of those accounts in the Bible would be false, would be a mistake. And that would mean that the Bible is not the Word of God, because if it is the Word of God, that would mean that God would be mistaken. And that's where this really falls in. If we're going to believe the Bible is the Word of God, we have to be able to explain that there are no contradictions in the Bible. So before I talk more about Judas, which I do not believe is a contradiction, let's think about the difference between a discrepancy and a contradiction. A contradiction means two things cannot be true at the same time. A discrepancy or a difficulty, I'm going to use the term difficulty for the most part for this video series. A difficulty is when it's hard to see how they go together, but it is certainly possible that they go together. And I believe that there are many Bible difficulties, but no Bible contradictions. And I would add furthermore, you might think, well, that's just kind of a way to get around it. You're playing a word game, you're calling it a difficulty and not a contradiction. No. I think when we have different accounts, we should expect difficulties. In fact, I believe difficulties actually strengthen the case that the Bible is making, not to make it difficult to believe the Bible, but actually it strengthens the historical information in the Bible. What do I mean by that? Well, let's picture a traffic accident. And there is an accident, and a police officer arrives on the scene, and he begins talking to different witnesses who saw the accident. And the first witness he walks up to, he says, well, what happened? And witness number one says, well, that red truck ran right into the back of the white car there. And that's his account of what happened. The police officer turns around, he finds another witness that was there and says, well, what happened? And that witness says, that white car there swerved in that lane in front of the truck, slammed on their brakes, and of course the red truck couldn't help but run into the white car. All right, well, those are some differences in the account. One seems to place blame on the red truck. He just ran right into the back of the white car. The other places the blame on the white car. And they start at different points in where they're narrating. One is starting right with the accident. The other is backing up a little bit. And if a third witness was asked to give their description, they might focus on something the blue car did right before that. Or they might say, I heard the sound and turned around and I saw how angry the white car, driver of the white car was. These are all discrepancies or difficulties. It would be up to the investigators to put together who was to blame, and they're going to talk to as many eyewitnesses as they can. If every person they talk to gives the exact same story, officer, that red truck just ran right into the back of the white car. I don't know if they were not looking at the road or something, but they just rear-ended that white car, end of story. And they all give that same, even the same wording, and the same order and the same starting point. The police officer is going to conclude one thing. These people talk together. They're wanting to sort of protect the driver of the white car. They're wanting to make it look like it is the fault of the truck driver. And so they worked out their story ahead of time, and that's going to weaken the credibility of their testimony. But if they're all giving different accounts, starting in different places, including different details, and they all fit together, but it's clear that they didn't work out their story ahead of time, well, now you have independent eyewitness testimony. And as you put together the story, you have great credibility that you can piece together what happened. That's what we have in the Bible. We have a number of discrepancies or difficulties that show that we have independent eyewitness testimony of the accounts, which gives great weight to how much we can trust the history they're recording. But we have no contradictions that would lead us to conclude that this is not the Word of God. So let's take Judas, for example. I think this is one that we can put together quite simply. Matthew tells us that Judas hanged himself, and he just gives us the bare facts. Luke tells us something that's much more graphic. It sort of makes us a bit nauseous to picture it, but it could still be that Judas hanged himself in Luke's mind. Luke doesn't actually use the words he hanged himself, but he's telling us the aftermath. He's telling us what happened as a result of Judas hanging himself. Either it is that when Judas hanged himself, the rope was not strong enough to support his body, and it snapped, and he fell, down the side of a steep slope and fell on rocks. And what Luke records is what happened kind of at the moment Judas hanged himself, or perhaps he hanged himself, and then later on, after his body had been hanging outside for a long time, then someone cut down his body, and of course there was no one there to lower him down safely or catch him. They just, in the process of cutting him down, he fell, and that's what happened to his body. Luke does not deny that Judas hanged himself, and Matthew does not deny that something terrible happened to the body of Judas immediately or sometime after the hanging. This is not a contradiction. And we can put the two accounts together and picture what is going on. I know this is kind of a gruesome example, but this one is one of the most common ones I see come up all the time from Bible critics. And so it's a good kind of starting point to see how there are Bible difficulties, but not contradictions in the text. Now, you might ask why? Why a very different way of writing about this? Well, I would say it's simple. Matthew knew Judas. Matthew was a disciple of Jesus alongside Judas, and they knew each other, and they were friends for a time. And Matthew, even though Judas betrayed Jesus, probably just wants to state the bare facts and doesn't want to get into all the gory details of what happened following the hanging. Whereas Luke probably never met Judas, doesn't even know what Judas looked like, and Luke wants to make sure that we understand what a terrible ending it is that Judas experienced, and so he includes some of these gruesome details to drive home the point he's trying to make. But there's no need here to conclude that there's any kind of contradiction. Just simply two different accounts with different details for different purposes. The same is going to be true, I believe, with the other sort of alleged contradictions in the Bible. They are not actually contradictions. Let's look at another example. So in this example, we see Genesis chapter 9. And this is another meme that I found on the internet. And Genesis 9 says that people are free to eat from any of the animals that they want. But then you turn over to Leviticus 11, and it gives a very specific list. You can't eat pork, for instance. You can't eat the pig. And then all kinds of other animals are listed there in Leviticus 11. Now, is this a contradiction? No, this is a different kind of difficulty. I want to kind of present some of the different examples. In this case, this is not a contradiction because two different people are being addressed. In the case of Genesis 9, the flood has just occurred, and God is addressing Noah and all of Noah's descendants. And he says, you are free to eat any of the animals you want. Leviticus 11 is a different time period. We're now much later in time. God specifically is addressing the Israelites. It says that right at the beginning of Leviticus 11. He's not addressing all of the descendants of Noah. He's saying, now you Israelites, at this point in time, I'm going to give you a more restrictive diet for my own purposes to set you apart from the other nations. I'm not going to get into all why those are there. But it was for a different group of people for a different time period. It is not a contradiction. There's not a contradiction in any sense. It's not that God says you may eat any animal and you may not eat any animal as if he's talking to the same group of people. No, he's clearly addressing different audiences. There's a different time period and a different purpose and reason for why he's giving the command that he does. Well, in the next video, we're going to look at several other alleged contradictions and types, including this one. Whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved, Acts 2:21. And Jesus then elsewhere says in Matthew 7:21, not everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Is that a contradiction? Not at all. This is a different type of difficulty entirely, and I'll cover that in the next video.